I'd like to welcome everybody to our show today. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and hit subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. That way YouTube will know to share it. If you're listening on a podcast, obviously, please subscribe to the podcast. So I'm fortunate to have with me today Mike Cameron, and he's the author of the book, Becoming a Better Man When Something's Got to Change. Maybe it's you. And he is going to talk to us about the impact of emotions in the business environment. And Mike, tell me a little more about you than I just gave them.
Sure thing. Ken, I've been an entrepreneur, a sales guy, a business leader for 25 years or so. And in December of 2019, I ended up selling the business that I built over the last 16 years to focus on my writing, speaking, that kind of thing. I'd fallen a little bit out of love with the business that I'd built, and I felt like I'd accomplished what I wanted to accomplish there. So I ultimately sold the business and went to focus more on the personal development aspect of things, the professional speaking and writing.
Oh, very nice. And you said that you have talked a lot about with people and try to help people with using emotion in business. So tell me a little more about that.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah. So for me, it goes right back to, and it's interesting, as I craft my bio and I think about what is my story as an individual, as a human being, when I'm presenting myself as a speaker or a writer. And what I realize is that I literally went from bagging shit to building, running, and ultimately selling a multi-million-dollar business. So it just makes a great story. But when I talk about that, I started my career working at a garden supply wholesale company as an 18-year-old, and I was literally bagging steer manure. And not exactly a fantastic job. At 18, it paid the bills. It bought me a case of beer on the weekend. It did the job. And ultimately, I worked my way up through the warehouse, ended up driving a truck, eventually got into sales. And that's when I first realized that nobody buys a bag of steer manure because they want to own a bag of crap. They ultimately buy a bag of steer manure because they want that feeling that they'll get when they grow that beautiful rose bush or that vegetable garden or what have you. So that was kind of my first taste into the fact that my customers don't buy the thing, they buy the feeling the thing is ultimately going to get them. And eventually I moved into finance. I hit the ceiling at the garden supply wholesale company I was working with. I realized I was just never going to get where I wanted to go there. Ultimately ended up in finance. And again, realized that for people buying financial instruments, investment instruments, I mean, again, it's a very emotional decision. So I started doing a lot of research on, I like to understand the why behind the what. And what I found was a fellow by the name of Dr. Antonio Damasio. And he wrote a book called Descartes' Error. And in it, he talks about, Rene Descartes was, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that, but it was a French philosopher. He's the one that posited, I think, therefore I am. So Damasio talks about, in fact, I feel, therefore I am. And he talks about his research is all about how, as human beings, we actually make decision based on emotion. Emotion is the edifice upon which reason is built. Emotion is the foundation that we make those logical decisions. And so for me, it started to become more than just in a sales context. And again, as I evolved into a business leader, I founded my own business and grew that from, one employee to several hundred. I recognized that my team, my staff, their productivity was directly linked to how emotionally invested they were in what we were doing as an organization. So again, I spent 20 years looking at that. And for a lot of that, I would get invited to conferences. I did very well. And so obviously people would want to know, hey, Mike, how did you do that? And I'm a guy that absolutely loves getting on stage and sharing information. So I started doing more and more of that. And again, always talking in the context of sales and leadership. Ultimately, what ended up happening, one of the sort of major pivotal moments in my life, in October of 2015, my girlfriend was murdered by an ex-boyfriend who subsequently took his own life. So when we pause and reflect on that, here's a man that made a decision with very permanent consequences based on a very temporary emotion. And so my focus started to pivot a little bit from sales and leadership into men's mental health. And really, I like to say emotional fitness more so than mental health. I think when we talk about mental health, it becomes this binary thing. Either we're sick or we're not. Whereas if we talk about emotional fitness, we know from a fitness standpoint, sometimes at some points in my life, I've been in really good shape. Other points in my life, I haven't been in such good shape, but I always have to work out, exercise, do the things to maintain that fitness level. And as business leaders and as salespeople, this is especially true. Again, for me, the context now a lot of the time is in violence prevention, but I also do a ton of work in sales and leadership because the things I talk about are the same. It's just the application is a little bit different. The context is a little bit different, but the skills, the tools, all of the things that we need to know that make you a decent human being also make you an exceptional salesperson, also can make you an exceptional leader. So that's the nuts and bolts of who I am and the journey that I'm on. It's been fascinating to me to realize that everything I had done for 20 years had led me to that point to help me navigate moving through that when that happened. And obviously, it was incredibly traumatic and I was incredibly grief stricken. But learning to move through that has really helped me to become a better leader, a better father, a better salesperson, a better partner, a better human being.
Yeah, and it's sad that you had to go through and deal with that, though you've done a good job, obviously, of turning it into something that has benefited you later on, which is that's amazing in and of itself. Some people choose to let themselves be destroyed. So how would you go about helping a company or a business that is trying to get better at these kinds of things? What is it that you could do for them, or how would you suggestions could you provide? Maybe is a good way to ask the question.
Yeah, again, depending on the context, I mean, I've got a couple of different frameworks that I use depending on what individuals or organizations are looking for. So I'm a big fan of framework versus sort of prescriptive instruction because all of us are a little bit different. Every organization is a little bit different. How they like to operate, their cultures, the way they operate is different. If you can give an individual or an organization a framework to follow, that's much better because for me, as a salesperson, there's three big pieces. That's ask questions, tell stories, and be authentic. And that would be my overarching framework. But of course, in order to be authentic, if I'm giving you a prescribed methodology that doesn't necessarily jive with who you are, either as an individual or as an organization, that's not authenticity. Whereas, again, if I can give you a framework to move through, then you can bring your own personal flair to it. You can bring your own organizational culture to it. But again, it becomes so important to have that framework in place so that we can have some consistency as an organization about how we deal with things. And we create an environment where our teams can practice these things. And I think that's the biggest piece, is understanding that these are practices. These aren't one and done. So it's not, you can, and this is, I get this at conferences all the time. they'll hire me to come in as a speaker. So that's great. I can come in, I can impart whatever I think I know to your audience. But at the end of the day, they walk away, and depending on how good I am at my job, maybe that sticks with them for a day, maybe it sticks with them for a week, maybe a month, maybe a year. But ultimately, there has to be some ways to create these ongoing practices to keep the skills alive. So for me, it's really about, and again, depends on how I get brought in, because obviously as a professional speaker, I do end up doing a lot of the one and done things where I will come into a conference and we'll have these conversations, and I'll share my frameworks. And again, my hope is that individuals and organizations can take those and implement them. So again, in a sales context, it's ask questions, tell stories, be authentic. And again, I've got an entire process for how you do that. Like I said, I'm a guy that likes to understand the why behind the what. I believe there's a professor by the name of Jeffrey Schwartz, who had a lot of research into questions, and again, how we create neural pathways. One of it wasn't him, but it talks about when neurons that fire together wire together. And so we talk about asking the right questions to help change the thought patterns of our customers. So telling isn't selling. I can tell you all day long that my product this, my product that, my product can do this, my product will solve your problem. When I tell you stuff, it's maybe. But whereas if I flip that into questions and I ask you the right questions, that starts creating new action. It actually starts to physically change your customer's brain and create new ways of thinking. So when again, as simple as, do you see how this might change things for you or your organization? What would it look like if you were able to do this? Again, ask those questions, get the customers to come to their own conclusions. The business I built and sold was a mortgage brokerage. So for many brokers, the challenge was always competing with the banks. So as a broker, I would go out, I would shop, I would find the best rate. Then the customer would go back to their bank. The bank would match that rate and I lose the customer. Yeah. I've done all the work, but I lose the customer. So quite often a broker's strategy would be to go into the customer and say, but look, I don't get paid if you don't use me. And I've done all this work. Well, I got news for you, Ken. Customers don't freaking care. They don't care whether you get paid or not. But if you flip that into a question and say, look, Ken, so let's just walk through this scenario. I've done all the research for you. Your bank was going to give you a rate up here. I've given you all the knowledge. You go back. Now they're giving you a rate down here. What do you think happens if every single one of my customers does that and I don't get paid on any of my transactions? What do you think happens? I go out of business. So let's extend that. What do you think happens if mortgage brokers no longer exist? Do you think your bank's going to give you this rate or are they going to give you that rate? So when you can start asking questions rather than telling your customer that, they can start to draw those conclusions themselves. Now it's their idea, their revelation, and they don't have a vested interest in it other than their own. So it's a powerful shift, and it's a very subtle shift, but it's a very powerful shift.
Yeah, I am a huge fan of questions, and it's interesting what you're talking about in the sales process, because when I had my copier dealership, I sold copiers. Yeah, I did everything. But one of the things I love to do, and this is why I never had a machine history card on the back of my machine where somebody could get it very easily, was I could take the card and it could be absolutely blank. But I would look at it and I say, has your machine always been this bad? You know, and it was amazing. You could see the gears. You know, it's been acting up more lately. Do you see your technician a lot? Does he have a desk here? You know, so you can start to build in a client with a question, a thought that may not necessarily be based in fact, but you start to create a belief in them that may motivate them to behave differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's powerful. Like I said, for me, there's two reasons you ask questions. One, to find out where a customer is in their sales process, and to change thought patterns and beliefs. And that first one is so important, and so many salespeople miss that. I remember the last time I went out shopping for a car, I had decided, I knew, again, we all do our research, so I knew exactly what I wanted. I was buying a Toyota Highlander, didn't care what color it was. What I cared about was my previous vehicle just had to have some major repairs, so I needed to get rid of it right away. I was going on vacation with my kids in 2 weeks. So what I cared about was quick. How quick can you deliver me this vehicle? Because I need it within the next 2 weeks. And so I walked into the dealership, and I remember the first one I went into, the sales guy says, "Oh, you're looking at a Highlander?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, why don't we take one out for a test drive?" And I'm thinking, I really don't need to. All right, fine. He wants to get me out for a test drive. Somebody's told him that this is the sales process. Fine. I'll humor him. We'll go for a test drive. I was with my 16-year-old son. Fine. We'll go for a test drive. So we go for a test drive, and he starts rattling off all these statistics about the Highlander and how it's got this and JP Morgan that and blah, 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 blah. And I'm just thinking, dude, I could probably tell you all of these stats because I've done my research. And he just kept yapping and yapping and yapping. And I said, "How quick can you get me one?" Because they were in very high demand at that time. And then he kept talking to me about the features and benefits. And so we got back to the dealership, and I said, "Okay, thanks a lot." I shook his hand and I walked out. I went to another dealership, and I said, "Look, I want a Toyota Highlander. I want this model. I don't care what color. I want to know how quick you can get it to me, and I want to know the price." And that sales guy immediately, "Okay, got it." Went into the back room, pulled up his computer, said, "Okay, you know what? I can't get you. Looks like it's going to be a month for this one, 2 months for this one. You know what? I found a hybrid on a lot down in the next town over. I could probably get that brought into here, but it's a hybrid." I said, "Okay, wasn't really what I was looking for, but what's the difference in price?" So he did some numbers, and he said, "Yep, I can get it here for you by the end of the week. Here's the price." I said, "Okay, done." So again, he asked the right questions to find out where I was in the buying process. He didn't take me all the way back to zero, because I think as salespeople, we often assume that our customer is at 0% sold. Whereas in reality these days, usually when a customer comes in, they're probably at 90% sold. And all they need to do is have them tipped over the edge. So if you take them back to zero, you're just annoying them.
Yes. Way too many salespeople become annoying rather than helpful. I am a salesman's worst nightmare because I usually know exactly what I want. In fact, last car I bought, I sent 5 dealers. I wanted a Kia Sorento. I didn't care. I just wanted a Kia Sorento. I knew what it was. I didn't care color, features, package, any of that. And I just circulated a quote around till we got to last man standing, but they all called me, wanted me to come in and I don't know. I sent you an email, answer the question. I'm just not coming in to play the game. But again, that's abnormal. No, what you said about people having made up their mind or not being a long ways into the decision process is very accurate. I saw a statistic recently that most buyers now in the office equipment space are somewhere between 60 and 70% of the way through the sales decision before they actually talk to a person.
Yeah.
So obviously they're not going to want to back up and start from zero. I love the other point you made in there about stories being important, because one of the things an adage that I heard and I love is that facts tell, but stories sell.
Yes.
And I think that having stories that your customers can connect with and then help them can put themselves see themselves in the other person's shoes and the benefit they got is what they're looking for is very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, as a bit of a science geek, if your listeners are interested, have a look at Dr. Yuri Hassan. He coined the term neurocoupling. And what he found was he hooked up a bunch of storytellers and listeners to a functional MRI machine and scanned their brain waves. And what they found was that as the storyteller was communicating a story to the listener, their brainwaves actually started to come into sync. So there's actually some hard science behind the fact that when I tell you a story, you start to have this emotional connection with me. And so we actually, by telling stories, we deepen that connection. And again, as salespeople, we all sell the same thing, whether we're selling copiers, whether we're selling mortgages, whether we're selling widgets, we all sell the same thing. We're all selling trust. I, as a customer, need to trust that you're going to take care of me. And so by telling stories, we can make those emotional connections. And as you said, so an exercise I would typically go through in a workshop with an individual or with an organization is, let's find a list of frequently asked questions. Let's find a list of common objections. Let's find a list of stories that match up to each of those. So you can build your arsenal, because again, as a sales guy in the copier space, I'm sure there's the same 6 or 8 objections that you hear over and over again. But identifying, is that a stall or is that an objection? And then again, just grabbing the appropriate story. And you can have a variety of different stories in your mental database that I can pull out. So again, recognizing that my customer has a sort of cruise ship background. Maybe I have a story about somebody that owned a cruise ship business that bought a copier. Okay, whoop, let's grab that one, because that would be appropriate for Ken in this moment. And let's have that conversation. But it's about selling by design rather than by default. And for me, that was a huge shift, because I was always a really good sales guy. But when I became great was when I stopped selling by default. And what I mean by that is I could wing it. And most good salespeople can wing it because they're charismatic, they're good, they've got the gift of the gab. But imagine if you could take your sales from here to here by being just a little bit more intentional and creating that sales process by design rather than by default. And that's a huge shift organizationally as well. Again, when we take our company and teach our people to do their jobs by design rather than by default, and create practices that we can continue to do that, because they get stale and best practices change over time. Technology changes. Certainly the copier business has changed. Every business evolves, grows, and adapts, and we get this global pandemic, and all of a sudden we have to shift our processes and how we do things. So again, creating an environment where you can continue to practice these things is huge.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with that. And it's interesting. I took a speech training program recently, and they talked about the importance when you're giving speeches, but they said that you want to have a story that you use. And they said it can be a 2-minute story. You can tell the story in 5 minutes. You can tell the story in 20 minutes. And you may vary the story a little bit, but it becomes your, let's call it your signature story.
Yeah. So I always ask, when I'm doing these types of interviews and having conversations, I will usually ask, and I didn't do it with you, but I did an interview with a fairly large radio host yesterday, and I wasn't sure how long our segment was going to be. So what I said to him was, I'm a storyteller. Do you want the 30-second version or do you want the 3-minute version? And he said, we've got lots of time. Give me the 3-minute version. And that just tells me, right, I'm being respectful of his time. And as you said, so you got the 30-second version of My Girlfriend Was Murdered in 2015. I did a TED talk on the entire thing. So I've got a 17-minute version of that as well. So again, it depends what's appropriate and in what situation. But you're right, absolutely. Having those sound bites in different contexts so that you can pull them out all the time. It was actually really flattering for me yesterday. The host actually said that to me partway through the interview. He said, you know what's so wonderful about having this conversation with you is, he said, you've got your message so dialed in that you've got your sound bites, you've got your stories. And like he actually acknowledged that on air. It was quite interesting. he noticed that. But it's true. I've got my sound bites. When I want to get this message across, this is the story I tell. When I want to get that message across, this is the story I tell. When I'm talking to a breakfast with the guys that's put on by a women's shelter, the stories I tell and the message I have are different than when I go into a copier organization and I'm teaching their salespeople. The concepts are the same. The context and the stories are a little bit different.
Yep.
So,
And I understand that 100% what you're saying. And so we can take that back. I want to circle back just for a second to what you're saying about to the average salesperson. If they'll learn to think about the common objections in terms of stories, ideally stories of their customers who they've helped that had positive outcomes. And one of the things I'm big about is get your customers to share the story for you if you can. It was interesting when I started my dealership. I started a copier dealership with $20,000, which meant that I didn't have any inventory. I didn't have demos. And I would literally take customers to one of my existing clients that liked me. And it worked really well because I would demo the equipment. I could ask the customer how things are going and what they thought of the service and let them do the sales piece for me because they could tell their version of my story.
Yes.
And I would encourage you along your lines, the salespeople, to think about that. So let me ask you this question, Mike. If somebody wants to work with you and wanted to benefit from your expertise, I'm assuming that they could go to your website and connect with you there. Was that the best choice or?
Yeah, mikecameron.ca. I'm up in Canada, so I'm .ca, or just email is mike@mikecameron.ca. I'm pretty easy to find online, and I'm not quiet, so I'm out there a fair bit.
Okay. I will definitely link that in the show notes or in the description for the video and the podcast. I'll also give them a link to your book. Again, let me restate the title and see if I get it right this time. Becoming a Better Man When Something's Got to Change. Maybe it's you. Okay. I really appreciate you being on the show today, Mike.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate it.
All right. And for everybody that's listening in, if you haven't already subscribed, please do. And we'll talk to you again.